Today on Sports Central, we're going over our next team projection of this offseason, and it's going to be over the Penn State Nittany Lions, a team that was certainly a big disappointment last season. I think we all can agree there, as Penn State started out the season with an 0-5 record. This team started out the season with 5 straight losses, ended up finishing out the season pretty well with 4 straight wins, ended up finishing with a 4-5 record overall. But this is certainly a team that I think will be right back at being a big contender in the Big Ten East moving into 2021, and that's what we're going over here today. We're going to be going over a few players that Penn State will be losing, who they're going to be returning, and also looking at their schedule for the first time this offseason, starting out with the previous 6 games for Penn State. And if you look at this team down the stretch, I mean, they started out the season pretty poorly, obviously. I mean, they lost their first 5 games, lost to Nebraska on the road on November 14th. That was a pretty terrible loss there, 23-30. Lost to Iowa by 20. Final score there was 21-41. They did beat Michigan. That's really where things started to turn around a bit for Penn State. They ended up going on a winning streak from there. Beat Michigan on the road 27-17. They beat Rutgers 23-7. They beat Michigan State, of course, 39-24, and that was before beating Illinois to finish out the season with a 56-21 win. So overall for Penn State, definitely, I'd say this was a disappointing season. I mean, 4-5 overall record is, I mean, yeah, that's pretty disappointing in comparison to how I expected them to be. I definitely thought Penn State would be at least 2nd or 3rd in the Big Ten East. Ended up finishing as one of the middle to the bottom. So, I mean, if you look at Penn State here, certainly this is a team that I still think has got a ton of potential going into 2021. It was just 2020. I do not know what happened with this team. Overall, it was just a messy season for Penn State, but I definitely think this team will be back and ready to go going into next season. And that's very evident by the returning production, and here's a roster preview as well. This team is returning a lot of key players going into next season. That is certainly good news for you Penn State fans. They return their starting quarterback, Sean Clifford. If you look at Sean Clifford last season, he was a pretty big disappointment. I definitely had a lot more faith in Sean Clifford. I thought he was going to have he definitely had a ton of potential going into the 2020 season. It just was ended up being a poor turnout for him. Put up 1,800 yards, 16 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and had a 61% completion rate last season, which, I mean, a 61% completion rate, you're not going to be able to get a whole lot of wins off of a 61% completion rate. So for Sean Clifford here, he's certainly a quarterback that performed halfway decent. I mean, the 16-9 touchdown to interception ratio isn't terrible, but it certainly isn't great. And he's got a ton to improve on going into next season. I definitely think he's got a lot of potential going into the 2021 season. They returned their top running back in Kevon Lee. If you look at him last season, he put up 500 yards, 4 touchdowns. Not a terrible season for Lee. Watch out for him next year. He could be a big impact player on this Penn State team. If you look at the second running back, Devin Ford, they will be having him back as well. He put up nearly 300 yards and 3 touchdowns on the season. Not too bad of a season out of him. So this running back core is looking great going into the 2021 season for Penn State. They got Kevon Lee coming back and Devin Ford, both running backs of which I definitely think will be some of the best in the Big Ten East. And if you look at the receiving core, they returned their top wide receiver in Jahan Dotson. That's going to be a big return there, putting up 900 yards last season and 8 touchdowns. And let me remind you, I mean, this Penn State team, they played 9 games, and Dotson put up nearly 900 yards through only 9 games. Very impressive performance this season out of Jahan Dotson, and I definitely think he's going to be a huge impact player going into next season. They do return their second receiver in Parker Washington. If you look at him last season, put up nearly 500 yards as well with 6 touchdowns. Not a bad season out of him. However, they do lose their tight end, Pat Freiermuth. That is going to be a tough loss there. He's certainly going to be a very early pick in the draft. I've seen some mock drafts where they actually have Freiermuth going in the first round, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But that's going to be a tough loss there. If you look at him last season, he put up 300 yards and a touchdown, and also he's just a great tight end in general. So that's going to be a tough loss there, but they do also lose 2 on the offensive line. They lose linebacker Micah Parsons. Of course, he's definitely going to be a first rounder. I wouldn't be surprised if Micah Parsons went in the top 10 overall in this upcoming NFL draft, for that matter. They do lose 2 defensive linemen, 2 in the secondary. So this defense is losing a couple of really key starters with, once again, Micah Parsons. Can't forget about him. And, of course, defensive linemen and 2 in the secondary. So it's 5 overall on the defensive side for Penn State as they're losing next season. So that's definitely something to watch out for. But brings up the question, was 2020 just one bad season for Penn State? I mean, if you look at this team, they've had so much success over the past, you could say, 5 or 6 years. And, I mean, 2020 was a huge outlier for Penn State. I mean, especially if you look at them in 2019, like, this team was a huge contender. Of course, they got upset by Minnesota, which really put the damper on that. That's for sure. I don't want to remind you guys of that. But, I mean, if you look at Penn State otherwise, like, this was a team that I mean, they've been so good over the past few years, and this was a weird 2020 season for that reason, being like they had good returning production going into 2020. They just were not able to execute on it, and I definitely think that's going to be something going into 2021 they're going to have to watch out for, as this team is, I mean, if they can execute on it, this team could definitely be a very dangerous team in the Big Ten East. Will Penn State be a Big Ten contender? I definitely think there's a good chance. I mean, that Big Ten East is going to be brutal next season. You got Ohio State in there. Indiana's going to be really good. And yeah, Penn State, I think Penn State could be that third team, but watch out for Michigan too. I mean, who knows? Michigan could be kind of in the same situation as Penn State here. Michigan had a very disappointing season as well. So Penn State and Michigan, watch out for both of these teams here. I definitely think both teams could be much better going into 2021. But that being said, let's look at your schedule now. You start off the season with a tough one in Madison against Wisconsin on September 4th. You got Ball State on the 11th of September there. You got Auburn on the 18th. That is going to be a game to watch out for there. Certainly should be a good one between Auburn and Penn State. You got Villanova coming to town on the 25th. To start off October, you've got a road trip to Iowa. And then, of course, you got Illinois, Michigan State, and Indiana to follow. That Indiana game is definitely going to be a very important one there. Certainly in determining the division there. And Ohio State, that game on November 20th is also going to be crucial, especially if Penn State is going to be a contender going into the later parts of the season. They got to win that Ohio State game if you're going to win the division. Like, that Ohio State team is definitely the top of the division right now. We've seen them win the division however many times in a row. Ohio State is definitely the leader in that division right now, and I definitely think Penn State could beat them. But I mean, it's gonna be tough. You definitely got to play very well against an Ohio State team that continues to have great production over and over again. You got Rutgers to finish off the season on November 27th. So overall, I mean, the schedule doesn't look terrible. You do have a pretty tough non-conference game there in Auburn. That game on September 18th certainly will be a tough one. But otherwise, here's what I'm expecting for the first half of your schedule. I think that Wisconsin game is going to be a close one. I'm going to say 20% chance of winning that one right now. Once again, we're not going to be giving out full predictions quite yet, mainly because this is so early on in the off season. But I definitely think that Wisconsin game will be close. I'd probably favor Penn State right now, mainly because Wisconsin has been so inconsistent, but certainly that should make for a good one there. Ball State, that's probably going to be a guaranteed win. Auburn's going to be a close one. That's certainly going to be a fun matchup between Bo Nix and Sean Clifford going head-to-head there. Then you got, of course, Villanova the next week, also another guaranteed win. That Iowa game on October 9th is definitely one to watch out for on the road there in Iowa City. Iowa's looking to be a pretty good team next season. I definitely think they'll be at the top of the Big Ten West, so yeah, that Iowa game is certainly going to be one to watch out for. Got Illinois coming to town on the 16th. I'm going to say that's a win as well. So you got 3 guaranteed wins in the first 6 of your games. Look at the second half, though. You got Michigan State, of course, on the road on October 23rd. I'm going to say that's a close one for now as well, mainly because Michigan State, I mean, I haven't really looked a whole lot into Michigan State quite yet, but I definitely think that's a team that could. I mean, they're returning a decent amount from what I've heard, so I definitely think Michigan State is going to be a team that could be a possible dark horse contender in that Big Ten East. But then you got Indiana, of course. That Indiana game is going to be very important as well. You got Maryland. I'm going to say that's a win against Maryland on the road. You got Michigan, Ohio State, both teams of which who definitely could be pretty good teams next season, especially Ohio State. I expect them to be right back in contention for the college football playoff. Then, of course, you got Rutgers to finish out the season. I'm also going to say that's a win. So I'm giving you 5 guaranteed wins going into next season with Ball State, Villanova, Illinois, Maryland, then Rutgers. Your record projection for next season, 8-4 to 10-2 for Penn State next year. Once again, I definitely think this team is going to bounce back from 2020. I mean, when you got as good of returning production as you do in Penn State right now with Sean Clifford, I really do think Penn State will be right back at being a contender to the Big Ten East. Really, I mean, 2020 just baffled me really for Penn State. I thought this team would be much better. It just was really confusing seeing this team fall as hard as they did at the start of the season. I mean, they were 0-5 at the start. I mean, that's pretty crazy to me to see Penn State struggle like that. But I definitely think 2021 is going to be a totally different story. Once again, your record projection is going to be 8-4 to 10-2. But that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Penn State. I appreciate you guys all watching. Yeah, stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. More previews coming over the next week. I'll see you guys all later.